Hello everyone and welcome back to Painting with Martin. Today we are going to take a look at something completely different that we haven't done for a very long time, or at least not on the channel. And if you look at this beautiful model in front of you, unpainted but sprayed with a primer of grey-white, something like that, you can actually guess, and that is from a very famous board game called Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. And the model here we're looking at is actually called the Vallejo Red Guard. And if you guessed it correctly, yes, he's going to be painted in red. So I'm going to show you today how to paint this beautiful model of the impressive board game that I actually haven't had time to play myself. But this is actually coming from a friend of mine that very kindly lent me his models, so you can see how you can actually paint them. And as I said before, I made sure that I spray primed this miniature in actually a grey primer. You can do with a white or even a black one as well, it's up to you. And as always, we are going to focus our painting in 3 easy stages. First, we're going to start with the base colors, moving on to the shades, and finally the finishing touches and highlights. For this model, as you can see that it's going to be very red, I'm going to use a variety of red tones to slowly build up the color variations. But I'm actually going to start by painting this cape here. And to make it a little bit easier, I'm also going to show you how to use what we call a contrast paint. And contrast paint, in this case from Citadel, it's called a Citadel color contrast Blood Angels Red. It is literally a mix between a base color and a shade. So you skip the shading step in terms of the cape here. And that means while this one is drying, we can actually focus on the armor, the chain here and the weapon here, as well as his helmet and maybe also the tail. So stay with me as I'm actually opening this bottle right now. I'm going to put down the model so we can get into the painting stage. And as always, I'm giving it a good shake before I start applying the paint. I'm using a fairly large brush for this one. It's size 3. And it's a golden maple brush. I bought it on Amazon. They work really well. They're a synthetic brand. And you put in a little bit of paint on the bristles, not too much. Use it undiluted because you don't need to dilute this one as it's already a half shade, half base color. And I'm going to look at, I'm holding the paintbrush really close to the edge of the bristles to make sure I have maximum control. I recommend you do the same when you're painting yours as well. So I'm going to use a few brush strokes here, and as you can see, the red is a very vibrant color here. I want to make sure that it soaks into the recesses here, and if you do actually manage to touch some of the base here, it's actually not a problem because we can cover it up later on. You can use the brush stroke up and down in different motions. It's up to you. I'm not an expert in any way in any painting, but I'm just trying to make it look fairly okay on the table. So make sure that you cover the entire cape here, even the sides here. I do not want to cover the armor, of course, and because that is a little bit of a different color here. I don't think this is the armor anyways, or the part of the cape. As you can see, it dries fairly quickly, and allowing us to effectivize this model's painting a little bit more. I'm gonna try and get in here with my brush. Oh, I touched the chain weapon here by mistake. That's not a problem. I will be able to fix that later when I put on the other color. And as you can see, it's a very easy way to do this. You can literally actually paint the entire model with this one, except for the armors and stuff. But I want to show you a different way to make sure that you can choose whichever method works for you. And like this. Make sure that I don't touch the upper part here, just under the helmet armor, because it's not part of the cape. You can do that if you really want to, but I'm going to show you another way to do that. And coming in here to the side of the cape, putting on some more here, and of course the insides as well. So a really good color. I strongly recommend the contrast line from Citadel. Has helped me a lot of times when I don't have the time to paint a model, and I still want it to look fairly good. It saves you a lot of time instead of having to apply the shade later on as well, and it gives a really vibrant, nice color. So if you miss some spots, don't be afraid to do that. Keep in mind that you also have here inside of the chain armor here. See if I can angle it. Sorry if you can't see it right now. I'm just doing it from my side, but I think you can see that what I'm doing here is actually inside here. And I'm gonna slowly get it out of this thing here because I need a little bit more stabilization. So I also need it under the cape here to make sure there are no white areas and nothing the primer's missing. You can't probably see it here in the camera, but it's a little bit fiddly work getting into all the paint underneath. If you miss a spot, it's actually not a problem. You can touch this up later on as well. So when almost done here, you can see that there's a little bit few spots here in the end of it. You can give it actually two covers. As I said, don't dilute this with water. Can't stress that enough. Of course, you have the side of the cape here as well. If you've played Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, which is your favorite character? I know there is this one, there's a human void warden, there is a demolitionist, which looks really cool to paint. We're going to come back to that one. I'm going to show you how to paint that one as well. Just need a little bit more research time because it's quite fiddly to paint. And there is also the hatchet, I believe, and there's this one, and there is, I believe, this one. Yeah, I believe those are the ones. Hatchet looks really cool to paint as well. I'm going to show you that one as well another time. And there you, oh yeah, a little bit underneath here as well. Okay, there you have it. All right, looks quite okay as it is right now. Now I'm going to clean this brush, and I'm going to move in to actually paint the rest of the armor. And when it comes to the rest of the armor, we are going to start with the base color. Let's close this one so it doesn't spill all over in case I flip over the paint jar. We're going to start with a Citadel color here called Mepiston Red, and we're going to use that for pretty much the entire armor set here of the cuirass or the breastplate, the shoulder parts, as well as the leg parts. But as you can see here from the beautiful artwork, the sides here inside here are not going to be painted red. It's going to be painted black or dark grey, as well as the glove and the weapon here, as well as the shield as well. But let's get into painting it with Mepiston Red. I'm going to give it a good shake, and I'm going to move on to painting that one. Mepiston Red is a very dark and vibrant color. If you feel that it's too dark, don't worry, we are going to lighten it up in a few stages. But I want to start off with a darker color so we can actually move on here later on. And it looks fairly easy. Now this is one of my favorite models from this board game to paint, and I'll tell you why. It's fairly easy, and I like the color red. My favorite color is otherwise blue. If anyone takes that spot for me, if I'm playing a board game, I'm not very happy. So if there's no blue, I'll choose black, and if there's no black, I'll choose red. And we'll see here, put this down, put this one. I'm using this color undiluted. You can use it with a little bit of water as well. Coming underneath here, I'll paint this one as well as this part. Something like this, and of course this, the, what do you call them? The graves here, I believe they call them in English. And this is what it looks like when you pretty much painted the entire thing red. Now, when it comes to the gloves and the kind of like thighs over here, then I'm going to use a color that we used before in other videos called Vallejo German Grey. And it's a nice, not too black, as if I look at the Picard art here, it actually looks fairly on a grey color. And I'm also going to use this color for the boots, or something kind of the boots, as well as the weapon here, as well as the chain as well. So I'm going to give it a good shake and put it out in my palette. And while doing that, the red color will actually have some time to dry. I'm also applying this undiluted because there's not much of highlights we're going to do later on in this one. And using the same brush, I'm applying it on this one. The reason why I don't put it on metal color right away is that I want a darker look to, and then make sure that the metal is actually kind of like a small highlight, and the darkening it. If you saw my video about German tanks, you saw that I put on the machine gun, I put on the same thing before I put on the metal color. Makes it look a little bit better. Metallic is a very strong color as well. So something like this, I'm going to continue touching this up as well. Also for the thigh armor here, hopefully you can see this. It also makes sure that the entire miniature is not just red. And dark colors like this one contrast really well with the red one as well. Gives it a kind of like intimidating, scary look. That's what we're trying to achieve here. When it comes to the other glove, you can see that it's a little bit fiddly getting it behind the shield here. So if you do touch up the shield like that as well, it's not a problem. Anyone who's watching this on the battlefield won't really peek behind the shield. I hope not, because if he is, I think he's going to get slapped with this chain weapon from this warrior here as well. So don't do that. When it comes to the boots, same thing here as well. Apply undiluted. It contrasts really well with it. If you manage to touch the base of the miniature, don't worry, we are going to touch it up later as well. When it comes to the tail, it can be a little bit fiddly work getting it to actually not to touch it. Try not to touch it. If you are, it's not a problem. See, I am touching it here as well. We can actually correct it afterwards. And as you can actually see, I've not painted the face here. There you go. I haven't painted the face here. I'm actually going to leave it white until I'm actually going to do in with a shade here. So in case you've forgotten, in case I thought about forgetting it, I have not. He is going to get his face painted. Now when it comes to the tail, you can see now how it looks with the blackened areas here. With the tail, I'm going to paint all of it red except for the tip. And tip is going to be in a very different color that we haven't touched before. And I think we're going to paint it fairly, opening a new bit more paint here, sorry about that. A bit more towards a pink color as per the card art. And it can be a little bit fiddly getting towards all the nooks and crannies of the tail. Don't worry, you can easily get to it with a fairly decent sized brush. And same color as before, Mepiston Red from Citadel. And you want the tail to cover all the way until the tip. Something like this. Leaving it to dry. If you realize you forgot a spot underneath or anything, don't worry about it. We can always touch it up later. As you can see here, the cape, it looks quite nice with just the contrast paint. If you compare the contrast paint here, let me look it up here for you. That's the contrast paint. You're turning it around the other way around. That is actually what it looks like with regular paint. It's not much of a huge difference, but you do see the shades there. Now, with that said, we're actually going to put some paint on the tail right now. And for the tail, I'm going to use a Citadel base paint as well called Demonette Hide. It's a little bit darker. You can use an even darker one as well, but I'm going to use a slightly darker one because I want to touch it up a little bit more towards I go. As you can see here, it's a really nice paint that contrasts really well with the red. If you're happy with this, you can just continue and leave it as it is. Turning it around, we can also touch up a mistake we made before with just like that. As you can see here, I forgot a few spots of the tail, so I'm going to touch that up with some Mepiston Red as well here, before we go into the shades or to the other part of the miniature. There you go. It's very easy to miss things here. As it's a very, very detailed figure. And there you have it. Now, my next thing here is going to be painting some metal paint. Oh, we almost forgot a little bit more here, paint on as well with some Demonette Hide. But the next stage is going to be that we're going to paint the metal part of the shield and the metal part of the weapon here as well. So bear with me, I'm going to put this one down. Oh. Putting it like this. And I'm going to touch over the last part of the tail, which I thought I covered. Sorry about that. Now, that looks much better. So let's get over and putting some paint on the shield. And for the shield, I'm going to use a color called, you can either use a color called Gunmetal Grey, or you can go straight into and paint it with natural oily steel from Vallejo as well. And as I said before, I chosen to use natural steel. You can use Gunmetal Grey as well. You can use Lead Belcher if you have it from the Citadel range. I'm applying it slightly diluted with water. But you can apply it neat as well. And for the weapon, covering the part here, the whole weapon will be covered with this natural steel. Making sure you don't touch the gloves. As for the chain, I'm going to use part of it, just like a few dots here and there, to touch out parts of it You can use it as a dry brush as well if you want to, but it's a little bit fiddly to get to because you might actually touch parts of the cape, which I'm just using it right now to just touch it over. And as you can see, it looks quite okay. Something like this. And if you feel that you actually it went a little bit too light or too much water with it, you can leave it to dry, the shield, which I did here, and then you come over it and touch it again. Another method is to just paint it over with German grey and then touch it over like we did here with the armor, with the weapon. When it comes to shades, which we're getting in right now, I'm going to shade the face with a color called Carrobourg Crimson from Citadel. I'm also going to use that shade across the red areas here of the model. You could also use null for this one if you want a darker tone. Also use Carrobourg Crimson on the end of the tail itself. I'm not shading the cape because that's already been done with thanks to the contrast color. But then I'm moving on to the shield, the gloves, the chain, the weapon, and the behind the shield, as well as the boots and the inner thigh armor here or cloths with either nylon or a shade called Black Shade from Citadel. So that's what's going to take place right now. And as always, we always shake the bottle a little bit before to make sure we cover, make sure we actually get all the nice pigments up in the color. Carrobourg Crimson is a very nice reddish shade, and you'll see when I put it on, undiluted of course, across the miniature, that some of the armors here, crevices, will actually show really nicely. Taking great care not to touch the inner parts of the cape. The helmet can work really well, as well as the face. Putting some more on. It's a really nice vibrant color, and it gives you a lot of detail and definition to the model that you can later on highlight up. In a few stages that I will show you. And you make sure that you want to, like with all shades, you want to make sure that it pulls in the recesses and it doesn't stay too long on the flat pieces of the armor. There's a few recesses here on the arm of the shoulder, as well as the helmet, that you wanted to pull with. And it will really help with the highlights afterwards. Don't forget this part of the cape here. You can smooth things over by using a wet brush. And that's what it looks like when it's done. Now moving over to the black parts of the shade for the boots, the weapon, and parts of the shield. I should also mention to you that the back of the shield, in case you're wondering, it is also the same German dark grey color. By applying the metal color first, it allows you to give a very vibrant color underneath. And in case you put on too much of the the silver or the metal, this allows you to cover it up and tone it down. Don't forget the boots. And of course the thigh armor. Turning around a little bit to get the inners of the shield, the other side of the boots, behind the boots, as well as any other metal parts or grey or black areas you may have missed. It's a bit fiddly to get it done, but it can be nice work. If you don't want to use Carrobourg Crimson for the tail, you can easily use another one called Druchi Violet, which I'm going to try as well. I found that the Carrobourg Crimson was a bit too light. You give it a good shake. It's also Druchi Violet is also from Citadel. Give it a good brush full. And make sure you don't touch the red parts. It's a really nice color. I strongly recommend this one. Allows us to touch it up a little bit later on. And with that said, we can leave it slightly to dry before we're coming back. You don't have to wait much longer. It will dry quite quickly. But make sure that you don't touch anything with highlights before you actually let it dry for a good while or two. As you can see, after it's dried, it actually becomes quite a little bit of a dirty look, which is fine. We're going to touch it up right now with some finishing touches, but we are going to apply a more what I call a selective shade, and we're going to put this shade in the crevices here, here, and around here and here. We're also, as I missed here, you probably noticed it, I missed actually painting the belt dark grey here as well, but I'm going to touch up the belt last, because it means that if I touch up some of the areas here and it goes on like dark grey instead of red, it can be a little bit of an issue. So I'm going to touch that up last in the finishing touches. So when it comes to this, I'm actually going to apply a shade of black shade, and I'm going to actually apply it selectively underneath each area here. Using a fine tipped brush. As well as this area here. Making sure that I shade this area selectively. Making sure that the armor plates or armor scales are showing a little bit more highlighted. And also I'm going to do that selectively over the chest mail armor, over the entire area. Making sure that it darkens a little bit. I'm not using black shade for this, as well as the sides here of the side armor, or the what do you call it, the shoulder armor pieces. As well as the highlighting the sun here, which we will put in a gold color in a little bit. I'm also putting up a little bit more on the gloves. And once this one dries, you can do another shade underneath the belt as well. Now, it's time for our finishing touches and highlights now. I'm going to use a Citadel color called Evil Sunz Scarlet. And I'm going to use it to touch up some of the lighter areas here. I'm not going to touch areas where the sun or doesn't shine. It sounds a little bit bad, but I'm not going to touch the cape. I'm not going to touch the shaded area under the shields, but anything that requires some kind of sunlight, I'm actually going to touch up. So I'm going to give it a good shake. I'm going to use this fairly small brush or fine tipped brush. Undiluted. And as you can see, it's fairly much brighter than the Mepiston Red. Let's see if you can see that. Hopefully you can. But taking good care not to touch anything else, and also a little bit of the shade showing underneath. It's a little bit tricky, this part, but you can get the hang of it, and especially if you feel that you don't overdo it, go back one stage and try again. Then it's the shoulder piece. Hopefully you can see it like this. And for the shoulder armor here, I'm only touching smaller parts of it, to making sure that the shade is actually shining through. And as for the helmet, doing the same thing here. Especially the horns, be a little bit brighter, as well as the sides of the helmet. And you might need a few stages of this one, but I'm only going to show you one here, showing you how it looks like. And now when you got some of the brush still, some of the, I'm also going to do this one part, the armor pieces here, as well as the greaves, top of the shoulder pads. Doesn't have to be perfect. And you can already see here that it shines really well with the shades here. You can do this in as many stages as you want. The idea here is to subtly highlight the areas up until you get a nice bright red finish. Taking good care to actually highlight areas where you actually see or can imagine the sun shining through. Let's see if I can see this, show this to you. Like this. Once you've done that, you can actually go in over another stages to continue doing this, or you can jump straight into doing some very, very small touches with Wild Rider Red, and just touch it very, very brightly. I'm going to show you that in just a few seconds. But before that, I'm actually going to touch over the end of the tail with some pure Demonetide, just as we did before, and as afterwards I will apply a small touch of a lighter color of the purple. And as you can see, I'm not touching all of it. I'm leaving parts of it shaded in the bottom parts. Make sure that it can actually, some of the shade was for nothing. It wasn't for nothing. Now, as you can see, probably the helmet up here, if you can see that. Hopefully you can, maybe you can't. You can touch that up with some more Carrobourg Crimson until you get to the color you want. I'm fairly happy that it's just a slight color variation of the white to the red, so I'm going to leave it as it is. But then after you've done this, you can go into the shields, which we're going to do right now, while the red actually dries. And we're going to apply some pure natural oily steel to the areas over here. Take and try not to touch the sun rays, which we're gonna paint in a bit. And of course a little bit more on some touching for the weapons. This kind of chain weapon that he has, which is really cool. There you go. When it comes to the final touch of Wild Rider Raid, you don't need much. It's a very, very bright color, so I'm only going to touch parts of the armor underneath. And only some small parts of it. These things, the little dots here sticking out, will be touched, as well as the points up top here on the shoulder pads. I will also touch the tips of the horns, parts of the horns up here. Make sure these touch out a little bit more, as well as this thing underneath here, parts of the edges of the greaves, as well as the cuirass on the center a little bit. And that's it. Looks quite okay. If you think the cape is too dark, too dull, you can, if you want to, use an old brush and dry brush into some Evil Sunz Scarlet into it. It's entirely optional. I'm going to show you how to do it. You soak a lot of part of the brush with the color, and you wipe most of it off on a piece of paper, kitchen towel, or so that almost nothing remains. Something like this, and you brush it across the cape. It helps the shade blend in a little bit with the other colors and gives it a bit of a dirty, rugged look. Something like this. Entirely optional. For the finishing touches of the tail end, I'm going to use a different color than Demon Attide. It is going to be a tiny dot of Emperor's Children from Citadel, which is a very bright purple color, which is why I only want a tiny bit of it, because otherwise it will become too dominant. something like this, and you can blend it over with your, smudge it over with your finger if it becomes too much. Just a little bit. You can dilute as well if you want to think it's too bright. You can also keep it as it is. I think it adds a nice touch. Point here is to keep some of the demoner tied underneath, which is why we started with a darker colour, and that's what it looks like. Now for the other touch we want to do is we want to do a shield. The shield, I'm going to use another Citadel colour that I really like called Retributor Armour. It's a gold colour, it's quite thick, and I'm using it undiluted on this model as well. And I'm going to touch only the bright sun in the middle, as well as the kind of like sun rays. As you can see here, if you get it right, you actually get a really nice look. Don't forget to paint the entire sun in the middle and work yourself out from the center to the edges. And before we paint the base, we are going to paint a little bit on the boots, which we've covered here, and the boots and the thighs armor. And I'm going to use the same colors before, which is German dark grey, German grey, and touch up some of the shoes here that we missed. Some of the black or dark gloves. And with that said, that concludes the model of Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, the red warrior called what was the name of it? The Red Guard. Got so lost in it that I already forgot the name of the model I was painting. So the Red Guard from Gloomhaven, this is what it looks like. It's a quite, I wouldn't say it's a complex figure to paint, but it's a really nice model to put on the table. For the base, you can either paint it black or brown, or you can use a texture color such as Sterling Mud. I'm going to use a Sterling Mud shade. And this is what it's called, Citadel Texture Sterling Mud. It's quite dark and groomy, and it's quite thick texture to it. Put it across the entire base, so any mistakes you made across the base, don't worry about it. You can cover this one up right now. You may need 2 or 3 layers of this one to get a nice even coverage, because you spray paint the base white. If you did that on black, you might only need 1 or 2. And that means the Red Guard from the Gloomhaven Jaws line is done. If you like this video, please don't hesitate to like, subscribe and share, which will help my channel grow. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you watching with me so far. I know this is the first time I'm trying this model on a channel, so I know that I probably made plenty of mistakes. That's the way it is. And if you feel that I've made too many mistakes, let me know in the comments so I can always improve and become a better painter. Otherwise, go and put some paint on those models, and I'll see you next time, and thank you very much for watching.